All right, everybody, welcome back. So this time we're going to kick off with a little bit of me sharing with Bryan what my takeaways were from the debate that Sean and Tomer had about pricing that was pretty hot on Twitter for a little while. And I think it actually leads to some really good questions around how different marketing leaders think about pricing. And then I'm curious to get Bryan's take, and obviously I'll share my view, but basically, to give the synopsis, Robin, who is on Tomer's team, I think she leads their SMS product, just put out on X saying, hey, I would love to see a debate between Sean, Tomer, and then if there's somebody from the agency side. And so they managed to get Taylor Holiday to join, who he's like very measured, actually. So like his like hot tweets versus his, on podcast are very, very different from each other. But he's extremely measured. So anyway, there was this debate on SaaS pricing. And I would say that the TLDR is that the way I heard it is Sean's actual frustration is not with how a SaaS company prices, but rather that he believes that certain vendors are deceptive in how they frame their pricing. So the thing that he is most frustrated with is when a vendor says the words, it is 1.5% of revenue, just like how Shopify charges a percent of revenue. Because in his view, when you say that, you're intentionally misleading the person, because Shopify's percent of revenue is a payment processing percent of revenue. And so you're making it seem similar, but actually it is different. Like one is just a straight take rate, and then the other one is like a payment processing fee that underneath which Shopify then has to pay interchange, which you cannot do anything about no matter what you do. And so that's like fundamentally his problem. And then he has a second problem, which Taylor teased out of him, I think, quite well, around a feeling that all software ultimately should be getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and that new vendors compete on price very aggressively. And so then he has an incentive to switch to the new vendor consistently over time, right? Which that I think is like just a debate. It's like kind of the free market. And this is where I thought Taylor's response in this whole situation was the most measured. It was just, hey, the free market will determine what people want to pay for and what people don't want to pay for. And then Tomer actually, it feels to me like he is going the Microsoft route on offering everything as the strategy. And so basically it's like you will buy the bundle from Yotpo because as an aggregate, he will make money, but on an individual basis, nobody else will be able to compete with him on price. And of course, they're trying to reposition how merchants view them. So anyway, that was the TLDR on the debate. And I'm curious, I've given you just like a very quick synopsis, but I'm curious, like when you think about like pricing for SaaS, like fundamentally, what are the variables that you're thinking about when you are thinking about pricing? And like, I guess not to like put you in a camp, but let's just say the spectrum is like, aggressive vendor over here, Sean over here, and Taylor in the middle. Like, where would you roughly consider yourself on this spectrum?
The first variable for me is predictability. I think that like with how I operate at Nood, everything is about forecasting projections, right? Like I'm in a business where I have to acquire every single new customer. We don't have a lot of...
There's no LTV.
Right. I don't have an LTV that creates sort of the baseline. We have some repeat and we do have some products, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to where the majority of the business is. And for me, predictability is massive. So by that, you're either a flat rate or you're something that scales and grows as I do better, but without, eating too much into my margin. But the expectation is that if I can generate an extra $100 million, from your tool, I'll happily pay you $1 million. Like, there's sort of a scale there that occurs, but you do have to be mindful that it doesn't, that you are comfortable paying in those millions. And sometimes internally we do have that misalignment. I'm from the camp that I don't really care what the fee is as long as it pays for itself. However, Sam, and rightfully so, and I think this is like into the diligence that we have, he's from the camp that we need to protect margin and our costs as much as possible. So he's big on imposing caps. So it's like, okay, you can scale up to a certain amount. But after this amount here, you've hit a cap. Where I counter that though is like, well, I need to keep that vendor incentivized, because if they hit that cap, how do I keep them motivated to keep growing this revenue stream that has already, by example, performed so well? And so, I think finding some common ground there is huge. But for me, predictability, back to the original question, predictability is the biggest thing. I think Sean is onto something there, because I have been like, the wool has been pulled over my eyes where I've been promised predictability. It's, our rate is simply X% of this. And then when you start to unpack it, when you start the services and you like want to use this feature or that feature, now you add in additional flat plus variable plus onboarding plus, technical setup, all this stuff. And it's like, one, I'm getting, absolutely margins start to get eaten up there, because now I've got these additional costs that I didn't forecast, I couldn't anticipate. And then two, now you've thrown off my entire forecast, because say I signed in May and I'm expecting that I'm going to do X and X and X revenue, and I can estimate your fees. And that's what I built my, budget off of. This is how I'm going to do hiring. This is how I'm going to bring on these other vendors, these other things, because there's an expectation of an ROI. But now I've incurred all these additional fees. Now, like, my whole model is thrown. Now I have to go back, revisit the model. I might have to cut or delay a certain activation or a certain vendor. And so that's my stance on it. I think for your second question of where do I sit in the camp? I mean, based on my response, I would say I'm very much like Taylor. I think I'm a bit calculated. It's like the math just has to check out for me. I'm not going to lose sleep over the fee itself. However, and you know this very well, it has to pay for itself. It has to. And if there's a ramp up period, awesome, no problem. But we have to measure an ROI. Right now, we're going through AI customer service, this sort of assessment. And it's like, okay, well, customer service, you could argue doesn't drive revenue, but I'm looking at it as like, well, could it drive revenue? Like, what would be the cost bringing on an AI to do customer service, to increase the response rate, to maybe someone that's like on the fence that has a question right now, we can answer it within seconds. They immediately buy. Can we like increase conversion rate off of that? And so, these things are expensive, but again, going back to making sure that it pays for itself and having some sort of ROI with predictability is big for me. The one thing that you said that's really interesting was related to there's sort of the incentive that you have to switch providers.
Yeah, to the next lowest cost option. Yeah.
I never thought about it that way. For me, it's not about the cost though. I mean, so we recently in the last 2 weeks just had an example about this where we have a provider, and I found this other provider, and I was just like, okay, you're cheaper and you have way more features. And so I went to the person.
And more features?
And more features.
Oh my God.
And I got to look at the product roadmap. And that's where I got really excited. And I think that like, without realizing it, there is kind of that incentive. I don't think that like I actively am looking, but if I come across a solution or a platform that is comparable to something that I'm using that's cheaper and has better features or has a roadmap that makes sense, then that is like, it kind of like all roads just point in that direction. But I think for me, it's less about the pricing. It's more about knowing that the invoices that I'm paying are being invested back into the company to give me better features. Like I got excited about like being able to do more with this other tool and knowing that they're actually building, right? And for me, like these vendors and like tools and platforms and tools like Fermat, they're investment. I don't see it as a cost center. It's an investment. We're in a way, paying for this service, but there's an expectation that the service is going to continue to improve over time. So that's where I disagree with Sean a little. I don't see it as like a decline in a race to the bottom on price. I'm actually seeing it as like, give me a reason to pay you more money, because if the math checks out, we're growing together. You're growing my top line, you're growing my bottom line, and I'm able to pay you more money. But there is a expectation that A, you're paying for yourself, and B, that you're now giving me better tools and features to give me a competitive advantage in the market against other brands.
It's funny that you said that. Literally, when I onboard with a new vendor, the number one thing that I ask them during onboarding, if I'm able to join, is how do I become your best customer? That is like the number one thing I ask them. And what I mean by that is, how do you produce the best outcomes for me? And therefore, like, you want to talk about me and I am able to pay you commiserately, right? And sometimes I will actually get the response, like, I don't think you will become our top customer. And that's like a good signal because then I can understand, like, okay, I'm actually not ICP for you. Like, okay, what makes me non-ICP for you? Like, how far away from ICP am I? And like, why am I still interested in buying you despite being like either imperfect ICP or on the edge of your ICP or whatever it may be? And like, you actually learn a lot when you engage in that way, as long as you do it sincerely. Yeah.
Right. With good intention. I think that's so interesting. That's an incredible question I'm going to start asking. And it also gives you sort of a peek into how important are you going to be for this vendor? I mean, I was on the other on the other side of this table where I worked at an ad tech company, and man, our top 5 clients, like, do whatever it takes. Custom solution, custom engineering, dedicated resource. Like, we are there to service them. Not to say that the other clients weren't important, but if there's a queue of issues and things that need to be problem solved, they're first on the list. And we'll get to the other group, but they're getting serviced a lot faster. So I love that question because it gives one, if you are aligned with as an ICP for them, or if you are strategically an opportunity for them to like expand in, it's going to give you a sense of how important you're going to be and how much support you're going to get from customer service, how collaborative they're going to be when you're like troubleshooting or when you're trying to do something new and cutting edge that no other brand is doing with their tool and platform. So that's a great question. I think that's the framing that everybody should try to have, because we all win, and it prevents this race to the bottom where resources start getting cut. That's what Sam and I were talking about earlier, where this morning we were talking about competition, and it was like, is competition good for the consumer? And my stance was yes, right? Because it's like, well, competition is good because it leads to lower prices. That's what like dictates the free market. He had a very interesting take though. He said, no, competition is not good for the consumer. Too much competition is not good for the consumer, because you saturate the market and it becomes a race to the bottom. And now, in order to thrive, these businesses have to cut resources, they have to cut corners, quality degrades, and the consumer ends up with an inferior product. Look at Shein. And I'm like, that's actually, you're absolutely correct. There is sort of this balance where you can't have a monopoly and you can't have too much competition. And somewhere in the middle is where the consumer ends up thriving, because there's a healthy competition that keeps innovation growing, but it protects the margin of business in order to allow them to keep growing. And I think taking that stance and applying it to our discussion here today, we shouldn't be incentivized to switch providers to get the lowest cost. It should be kind of the opposite, is who's delivering on innovation and features that give each other a competitive advantage.
I'll tell you also the biggest trick that, I mean, you said it out loud, that's true for every SaaS company, especially venture funded ones, is if you are in the top 10 most important customers for that SaaS company, you are getting 4x at least relative to how much you are paying them, because they are actually investing 80% of their resources into the top 10. And the reason is very, very simple. It's because that's what drives future growth for every SaaS company. So it's like, if you're in the top 10 companies at Fermat, for example, like, we're bringing you to all of our customer panels. We're having you meet our product managers. We're actually asking you what you think about all of these new features, and we're building them against your roadmap because you're a signal to us of where the market is going, in addition to just being a strategic customer to us, right? And so there's like, you get way more benefit in that camp than like, honestly, if I view you as a customer who is likely to switch to the next lowest cost supplier, I might even tell my sales team to not sign you. Like, that's just true because the free market ultimately wins. So like the most useful insight from Taylor's point, in my opinion, is that it's just true no matter what you do. It's like, it turns out that like, no matter what you do, people who want that tool or that advantage are going to pay for it. And if you choose to not participate in that, then you're going to be the only one who doesn't participate in that. Right. And so like the free market ultimately will win anyway. It's just sort of like a fact. And so you get, I mean, look, you have to be able to be in the top like 10 customers for that particular SaaS vendor. But if you can be, then you should actually take advantage of that position and seek all of those other opportunities that you know that those companies are making available anyways for their top customers. So I actually, I mean, and I'm happy to say that out loud, right? It's like, it's just true.
Yeah.
So
And it's not unique. It's not unique to Fermat, and you know, you see signs of this everywhere, right? Like Meta's disruptor program.
Yeah, that's what that is.
Is what that is. It gets, you know, special access and support because they've been identified as strategic accounts that can grow to be enterprise. Same with the mid-market group. And this isn't just Meta. This is viewable on TikTok as well, TikTok accounts. And I think everything that has some sort of service industry built into it, if you're not doing that and you are in some sort of service business, you're kind of blind. You need to know where your consumers are focused on and what keeps them up at night and build towards that. Cause that's, to your point earlier, that's what's going to generate future demand, future revenue. Let's talk about like, how do you get there? So like, okay, you mentioned you have to be in that top 10 outside of spend or revenue opportunity. What are some characteristics or things of brands that they can do in order to get in that top 10 with a partner like Fermat?
Actually, interestingly, even more than spend is just usage and novel usage. So actually it has less to do with revenue and it has more to do with like usage and novel usage. So I'll give you like a really good example. There's a customer who I don't want to, even though we're allowed to share their name, I don't want to share it in this context because I don't want to like associate the strategies with the customer. So it's a very well-known customer. Okay. And for a variety of reasons, the actual revenue to us is actually in our median. Okay. So they are not in the top 10 in terms of revenue to us. It turns out, however, that they are using us in ways in which other people are not using us. So for example, they're using us in retail use cases. They're using us with like some particular TV events that they're going to launch. They're using us in all sorts of ways that are net new to us. And so we're just like, what is going on here? Like we have a Fermat experience live with them that does not have a conversion event. Like you cannot buy from that experience, which like, that's like weird, you know? It's like, that's like kind of what we do. It's like, we can make it more effective for you to drive conversion. And they're just like, but actually, here's like this other set of things that you guys are like really good. And I'm like, amazing. Like, and so they're teaching us all of these things that we otherwise would not have realized. And I think that that's like a really good example of it actually is not, but they're leaned in. So they're not paying us in money, but they're paying us big time in their time. Right. So that's like a way that you end up becoming like a very strong partner of somebody like us. Another example is like, honestly, it's like with you, like being extremely data driven. So again, independent of like the revenue to Fermat, the more insight you can provide about what the tool is and is not doing, and clearer you can be about why it is viewed in a certain way, the more valuable it is to that company. And so like, it is often actually not just revenue that now revenue is like the naive way to like find a lot of those types of things, right? It's just like the SAT score for college admissions, but it's just actually not the main thing. Now, of course, the SaaS company you're working with needs to be able to like recognize all of those things. And so I think that's a good signal as to whether or not you have a good partner at the SaaS company. But those are the types of things that I would say are not revenue that drive a lot of strategic alignment.
Yeah, I love that response. I think that's, because I imagine a lot of people are going to sit back and go, well, I don't have the largest budget and I may not be able to deliver the most revenue for the business. How do I break that top 10? And I think to your point, it's lean in, be a good partner, find where the business is prioritizing. Do they need case studies? Are they needing data? Are they needing usage? Are they needing innovation? Like, are you in a strategic industry and sector that maybe they're not tapped into and like you are sort of pioneering usage for future businesses and companies in your industry? So I think identifying that and maybe just having a candid conversation. That's something that I, every time I get a new rep, like, so let's say I'll be activating on Pinterest. If I get assigned a Pinterest rep, that's the first thing I'm asking them is like, okay, like, how do you win? Like how do we make sure that, 6 months from now, you are teed up for a promotion or a raise, or like, how can Nood make sure that you hit your goals? And you find such like interesting answers, but it teaches you about how they're incentivized, like what they care about. And rather than playing this game of like, run this alpha, run this beta to increase your spend because secretly I'm just trying to like get you to grow investment. It's very clearly like, hey, you hit your numbers if I spend more money. So here's the way I'm going to spend more money. If you can deliver me this, and this, and it just like, you just break through the sort of the
noise,
yeah. And that dance of like, oh, like I know what you're trying to do, but I'm going to pretend like I don't know. Just have an open dialogue about it.
I'll share a very particular example just to make it even more clear that like collecting revenue from the customer is not the only way that businesses like ours, like Fermat, make money. So I came to you, Bryan, with a specific opportunity about like helping an ad network break into e-commerce, which I'm not good at, right? But we have like this like very strategic opportunity to like do this like very interesting thing with this totally new type of ad network. The Pinterest thing reminded me of that. And what was I thinking when I was thinking about like, hey, which merchants am I going to invite to this new opportunity? I was like, well, I need to make sure that that partnership is set up for success. So I'm going to look for people who are able to give me good data, who know how to test new networks effectively, who have interesting ways in which and interesting audiences that are going to have a good overlap with that potential new partner. And so it's like, yeah, it's kind of that simple. And in this whole exercise, I am not going to make more money from Bryan, just to be really clear, but I am going to make money from the partner, assuming it's successful. Right. And so like, it really is true. So I share this story because I'm trying to highlight it's really true that if you are a strategic partner to your vendor, you can access things that are valuable to you. And that person is not only thinking about again, you have to be good, that not only thinking about like revenue direct from you, but like all of the other ways that are going to like 10x their business that have nothing to do with revenue collection.
Yeah. Well, everybody's going to be a lot nicer to the partners now.
I hope so. I hope so. Okay. So I'm going to switch from that to hiring, right? So like one way you get leverage is with vendors. The other way is with building your team. And Nood, I think, is a very interesting study because like you guys have a very lean team relative to other businesses of your size. But how do you think about what are the right types of ways to get leverage from hiring people? And how do you phase that hiring?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'll start by saying that when we hire, everyone that we hire goes through an assessment. Like literally every single person that we've brought on has done some sort of project or assessment before they've got the job offer. And some people are going to disagree with that and say like, well, that's not fair or that's not right, but like, or you pay them what, that's their time. I get it. But if you want the job, you're going to do the project. And if you don't want the job, or if this project is too much for you and you are requesting XYZ demand, it's not, then like walk away. It's not a good fit. This is a semblance, an example, representation of what's to come, what's to be expected. If you're not aligned, then we're so grateful that neither of us wasted each other's time. So we do this project, and then we set up a 30, 60, 90 day plan. So over the first 30 days, what's to be expected, the KPIs, the deliverables, 60, 90. And then, in some roles, we'll do like a 6-month plus to kind of like paint the vision, especially for a new role, that there isn't any sort of like roadmap. All that to say, the expectation that we have is that every role is in a way contributing to the bottom line. So if we're hiring customer service agents, are these customer service agents going to be able to support mitigating returns? Are they going to be able to process tickets faster? Are they going to be able to help convert? If we're hiring in operations or a demand forecasting, right? Demand forecasting is critical. Are we able to now forecast a lot better to place our purchase orders better and more accurately to protect, one, cash flow, and then two, do things in a slower cadence to maybe ship by freight or to negotiate better terms? If we like stack up all of our wholesale during 1 month, are we able to then like get a better unit? So
you're getting every role to pay for themselves, basically.
In a way, yes. It's very similar to the SaaS pricing. If you're not paying for yourself, like, can you at least get like 80%? And I think and exactly right. Every single role is looked at through the lens of how is this going to help us grow and protect the bottom line, grow the top line at the bottom line, literally every single role. And so like what that does though, because like if you look at it through that lens, and it does require a little bit of creative thinking, like not every role translates directly into that, especially newer roles. But if you try to look at it through that lens, you can then through that 30, 60, 90 day plan, kind of set an expectation of like, what is the bottom line impact to this role? And then look at it as a percentage of contribution dollars or your gross profit. So, for us, we can set a percentage of gross profit. And then we have that like working capital for X hires. And if the expectation is that if we bring on this person and this person is going to be able to increase top line revenue by 30%, then like I know that in June, July, and August, we're going to see this growth, which then opens up more capital to then hire more people. And so I like the exercise that I run is basically a P&L, if you will, very simple P&L. This is more like a hiring P&L. And it's got like, what is my forecast to date? Like if I were not to hire anyone, if the business stays the exact same, we don't do any initiatives, we're just like stay in the course. What are we on path to do? Great. We have that in place. We have current budget for hiring. And then we've got like contribution margin and EBITDA at the bottom there. And then from there, what you can start to do is, okay, if we bring on this role at this month, what's the expected impact to either the bottom line or the top line? And then how is that going to influence the remainder month top line to then affect the budget for more hiring? So it's kind of like a puzzle. If you ever play Sudoku, it's like Sudoku. And so I'm playing Sudoku here. And then that starts to then tell you how you can stagger your hires. So we just went through a very aggressive hiring initiative. We brought on a couple people. There's a lot more people that I would like to hire, but in order to be strategic, we're going to sort of phase these first 3 in, give them a couple of months to then affect the top line and the bottom line, to then make it super risk adverse to then move on and hire the other folks versus trying to bring on everybody all at once, which yes, optimizes speed. And there's like a time and place for that. But now like, what if some of these assumptions are wrong? You've just opened yourself up to a lot more risk. And so this allows us to mitigate risk. It's a little bit slower. It's more methodical. And it also helps ensure that you don't have too much bloat. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I would love to have a massive team, but I look at some of these companies and I'm just like, you don't need all these people. I'm sorry, but you don't. Like, and I say that cautiously because Nood, we are under staffed, but there are some brands out there that their marketing team is like 30 or 50 people. And I'm just, there's a lot of overlap, a lot of duplicate roles. And those are the ones I look at a little bit funny. But in either case, I think that having some sort of process like that, tailoring it to your brand, that's how I look at it. And for me, it's all about revenue growth, being a bootstrap business, profitable business. We want to make sure that we stay that way. But what about SaaS? So like you guys have been crushing it. In fact, I'm like, how do I get you guys to start doing recruiting for us? Because what the heck?
Well, okay. All right. So first I want to provide a philosophical counterbalance to like the highly measured sort of like make sure every hire is incremental. I think there's two ways to build a business. One way, and I think in D2C, the two are closer together than they are in SaaS. One way is you build a business that has the highest possible enterprise value. And the other way is you build a business that has the highest possible cash flow. And I mean absolute, not like, like profitability. So it's
right.
10% versus
dollars.
Yeah, like real dollars. Yeah. Because like people get all caught up in this, like how profitable is it? And it turns out that like you're just making less actual money.
This is why we have debates about cost caps for some reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry. I just had to throw that out there. All right, go ahead.
Oh my God. Yeah, roughly. Right. And so, yeah, in SaaS, so in D2C, I think those two outcomes are very similar to each other because right now, a lot of D2C businesses trade based on their actual like profit volume on EBITDA as a multiple of EBITDA. But in SaaS, they don't. Okay. And so this is a very important difference because in SaaS businesses trade on a multiple of revenue. And so enterprise value, and I'll get into this a little bit, but enterprise value creation and cash flow creation or EBITDA creation are actually, cash flow is only one component of how you create enterprise value. So, okay. So what does that mean in terms of like hiring for a SaaS company? There's like three things roughly that I think about. So the first one is, how we just spent a bunch of time talking about like, how do you become like a top 10 customer at a SaaS company? Okay. So I know that today people hate Attentive, but it was true that there was a 6-year period where people loved Attentive, loved it. Okay. And you want to know why? It's because they made everybody feel like they were a top 10 customer. And the way that they were able to do that was they raised money, and they raised more money than everybody else so they could invest in an exceptional sales team and an exceptional account management team. And I know the Attentive team because their lead investor is also our lead investor from our Series A. And so we get a lot of lessons basically. And so I will say very directly that one of Fermat's core principles is provide an experience to every brand that makes them feel like they're in the top 10 of our portfolio. And so you will see us, and you will hear this often, and I hope you have this experience, but like our account managers, people really love like Sarah, Grace, Amy, like all of the people who they interact with, because we are over investing an incredible amount into that team and into those people. So that's like one part of hiring is just like, what experience do you want to give your customers and how do you hire against that experience? Because when it goes to enterprise value creation, it turns out that the companies who win, so like if you look at Attentive versus Postscript, Attentive is like a $500 million revenue company and Postscript is like 100 million. I mean, these are rough numbers. But there's like the enterprise value difference between a $500 million company and a $100 million company is not 5x, it's 10x. And it's because that customer love got compounded so fast. So that's like one thing is like, we're going to hire to drive customer love more than anybody else. And so like my job is then to like be able to fundraise to be able to support that in order to drive compounding enterprise value. Right. And then the other side of it, it's just like, who do you hire? So this is like Aaron and Alexa and Rabah and Alex and just keep on hitting it with like the best people in e-com. And there, my philosophy is very simple. There's nothing that compounds more than people advantages, because now everybody is wondering, like, first of all, they were like, why did this company raise so much money? Okay. Like, that's like the first question to get asked. Then the question is like, why is this company hiring all of these amazing people? And so even if you have no idea what the product does, which 80% or 90% of econ has no idea even the people who use us don't know what the product does. Okay. So like, a lot of people don't know what the product does. It doesn't matter, because there is so much built-in trust from those other signals. Jess at Hire Fire Team actually said this very well. He's like, I sometimes buy tools because I know that that team is investing in my success. So it's like, I'm not even sure that the tool is the best tool, but I know that those people know me, care about me, and are going to do whatever they can to make me successful. And I'm buying into that. It is one thing to say that. If you have the resources to be able to do that, then you have like a totally different advantage relative to your competition. Right. And so like, that's the feeling that we're trying to like give people with these hires, is like, we are going to invest in your success in not only the way we staff, but in like who in particular we hire. So you have the utmost confidence that when you work with us, you're going to get a good outcome. So that's like roughly the philosophy on hiring. Now, it's very hard to do and it's very expensive to do. And I spend an insane amount of my time on hiring, but I think that that's actually the most compounding thing in a SaaS business.
That makes absolute sense. And I agree with what Jess said. Like, there's certainly vendors that I work with, which if I feel like our incentives are aligned and I feel like if something were to go wrong and we're going to get a response and we're going to get taken care of, that is a more comforting feeling than like the best tool out there where CS support or account management just isn't there.
I mean, you gave me an example recently where, I'm not going to name the vendors, but you switched from like one tool to another tool. And one of the changes that happened in that switch was that second tool that you switched to, you felt like you were getting more strategic advice from them. Whereas the first company, even if they have better like product capabilities, potentially, the touch and feel of like that advice was not there. And that like was a big difference. And that to me is like, sort of the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's who came to mind for me. I didn't want to name drop, but yeah, we sacrificed a lot of features, but man, when there is a problem, this team is just so on top of it that
and everybody knows it.
Yeah. Versus the other one, we'd have to go through the proper channels, file a ticket, wait for the ticket to get assigned, for it to get triaged, get an update, follow up. So it does make a meaningful difference. And I think, for SaaS, like, you're hiring the people that interact, but then you're hiring people that attract the customers as well. Do you feel like that is sort of underutilized by other SaaS companies? And like, yeah, they hired, but they don't think of their hiring as like marketing in a way. It's just kind of like, oh, like we found who we believe is the best person for this role. But, you could have hired yourself a Raba who just has earned so much trust in the community, and people will, I'm not saying like Raba, like, oh, Raba's there, I'm signing, but like, oh, Raba's there, this must be really interesting. I want to check this out. And, I don't really see a lot of that.
So do I think it's underutilized? Maybe. I think that the bigger issue is actually that most founders and most SaaS companies don't think about building enterprise value. They think about building revenue. And I think that that's the fundamental problem, actually. And so like, the reason people don't do it is because they're actually solving the wrong problem in the first place. And so like, look, we raise venture money, and it is our job to, for the sake of the employees, the shareholders, for everybody involved, to drive the highest possible enterprise value, because that's what allows us to invest the most in exceptional customer outcomes. And so I think that when you think about things in that way, that's when you arrive at questions like, should I be hiring people that in and of itself increases enterprise value to the, because like when Rabah joined, it increased the enterprise value of the company without him saying anything. Same thing with Aaron, same thing with Alexa, right? And it's just like, okay. And then what you do is you ask that question for like every role. And just like you asked the question on the P&L, because again, like by the way, you guys do the same thing, but you do it based on, is this person going to produce more profit? But for you, profit is actually how you drive enterprise value. And so it's just, I think it's just in SaaS, I think too many SaaS CEOs and founders don't have a handle on what produces enterprise value for them.
That's an interesting take. Well, that's the homework assignment from this week's pod. Figure out what's driving enterprise value for your business. No, and even in the D2C side, like, are you a business that's built on your acquisition efforts, or are you a business that's being valued on your stickiness of your product? Which product? What is the hero? And then I think investing through that lens, makes things interesting, right? It like, should we upgrade the packaging for this product, or do we have the best ingredients in market? Do we need to invest in like product innovation to continue to improve this product because it's our hero and this is what is driving that enterprise value? There's a lot of operational, thought-provoking questions outside of just like, what is the ROAS? How much are we spending? And are we growing our bottom and the top line? I think you can get more alpha and more opportunity when you actually start to dig deep and like go into it from that lens. So, I say it in jest, but it's actually quite true. Like, go figure out what is driving the enterprise value for your business outside of just EBITDA, and break that down. Like, what specifically is driving that EBITDA?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest way this shows up, especially for D2C founders, is if you're going to get the business acquired at some point, which I'm not saying that you need to, right? Like, there's a bunch of people who I'm sure are happy to run it on cash flow. If that's your goal, is retail important to your acquirer? And are you going to get a different valuation because of that? Like, all of a sudden, now you know how to invest differently, right? That's like a very tactical thing that's different for D2C different for D2C founders than like SaaS. So
that's huge. That's a good, even branding as well, because I can tell you, like, from the people we talk to, they know and they've seen our ads. And it's because we were able to build awareness and brand awareness through our performance marketing dollars. But if you don't have that capability, then you need to invest in your brand. You need to go buy that billboard or get that partnership, because it catches the eye of the potential buyer.
Exactly. Guess what else is in that domain? Who's your audience? Guess what a old stodgy company is going to want to buy? They're going to want to buy a D2C brand that sells to 22-year-olds. And so $1 that a 22-year-old spends is not the same as $1 that a 40-year-old spends. And so there's just like anyway, like, know what drives your business, know what drives enterprise value for your business, because actually it should change how you invest. Yeah.
Man, we started on like hiring. We landed the plane on what is driving enterprise value for your business. Totally unscripted. This is why I love these calls, because zero prep, zero script. You are seeing this mind melt here happening in real time. And, it's sort of, the conversation just ends up flowing, but, awesome.